Chosen genre outcome. On here you can see some examples by art and photography students where they've been developing ideas for a final outcome, which is linked to all the various things they've been looking at within their project. You're going to be doing this week, and today you need to first of all reflect back on some of the different genres and techniques and approaches that we've looked at recently. One of the genres you might have chosen to look at is still life, and I've got some examples here of different artists or techniques that might inform your final piece. So it could be that you look at an artist that we've studied within class, such as Wayne Thiebaud, who obviously focused on food, usually things like cakes and sweets, and he created paintings usually in quite sort of pastel shades. There are also other artists that you may be familiar with because we've looked at them in previous years, such as Yayoi Kusama or Vincent van Gogh, both of them using very bright, bold, vibrant colours. Yayoi Kusama in particular uses quite block colours, so that might work quite well with acrylic paint. You could also think about artists such as Giorgio Morandi. It's a long time ago, but I did actually refer to him back in year 7. A really good example of a still life artist, and this is an example of him using pencil and specifically using cross-hatching to create a still life. And then at the bottom, here's just another technique you might want to consider. Collage is quite a nice way to create an outcome. I've got an example here by Nancy Stanley. So these are just some things for you to be thinking about. If you want to focus on still life, you need to be thinking about what artist could inform you and what technique you'd like to use. If you want to focus on portraiture, here are some other examples that could inform you. So of course we have looked at Shepard Fairey, who uses the editing technique to posterize to create sort of block colours, and then he turns it into a painting. There's Adam Pizzerni, who is a photographer, but you could take inspiration in terms of use of pattern or the use of black and white. We've looked at Hayley Warnham in class, and of course she sort of combines photography and collage, or sometimes people call it photo montage. Previous artists we've looked at include Chuck Close, Anthony Gormley and Frida Kahlo, so you might take inspiration from them. For example, you might want to create a watercolour painting inspired by Frida Kahlo. And then finally, if you have got any other interests or things you've been researching yourself, such as manga is quite an interesting style to look at for portraiture. You could look at a specific manga artist who has created portraiture like Akira Toriyama. So first, you need to choose an artist for your inspiration. This artist should link to your chosen genre. Secondly, you should choose a medium to work in, and by that I mean what materials do you plan to use? Is it going to be a watercolour painting or a pencil drawing or a collage, for example? Then finally, if you're doing a still life, you'll need to collect some objects. So if you're at home, then obviously get some objects from around the house. If you're in school, you'll need to ask to get some objects from Art Store 1. If you're focusing on portraiture, you'll need to look into finding a model and taking a photograph. So you'll need to consider things like a simple backdrop and the lighting. As an example, if you're focusing on still life, it might be that you've decided to focus on Wayne Thiebaud and you'd like to create a watercolour painting. So some key features here are use of objects that you might find at home, and also he used multiples, so lots of different objects, not just one. So first of all, you'll need to arrange your objects, think about your composition, so how you actually arrange the objects, think about the rule of thirds and a simple backdrop. Next, you'll need to think about 3D form, shape and line when you're sketching out the basic shapes of those objects. And then finally, you'll need to think about how you're creating different tonal values, so going from light to dark and identifying things like shadows and highlights, so looking really closely. And secondly, when you're applying the colour, you need to think about the colour theory that we looked at before Christmas, so how you're actually mixing those different colours, and again, looking really closely to try and identify the correct tones. If you've decided to focus on portraiture, here's an example of the type of thing you might do. So say you've chosen to focus on the artist Hayley Warnham, and then you might want to be exploring photo montage or collage. First of all, you'll need to take a photograph of a model and you'll need to consider lighting and orientation. So are you going to take it portrait or landscape? You'll need to do some basic editing, such as turning the image into black and white and then printing it out. And then finally, you'll need to think about geometric shapes, pattern and block colour when actually planning out cutting and layering sections of coloured paper to create this sort of effect that you see in Hayley Warnham's work. Obviously, you're looking for that contrast between the bold sections of block colour on the coloured paper against the black and white photograph. So these are just two examples of different routes that you might take, but it's your choice what genre you're focusing on, which artist you're taking as inspiration, and then what technique you're using. If you're feeling really unsure, then just take one of the examples I've got here on this slide. Do let me know if you've got any questions. I would suggest that you work either in the next available page in your sketchbook, so the next white page basically, or if you'd prefer and you're able to work outside of your sketchbook, you might prefer to work slightly bigger, like on an A3 piece of paper, for example. That is up to you. You're going to start this week, and you'll also be using next week as well. This should be a really sustained, high quality piece of work, not something that you're just going to rush in one lesson.